Hey guys, me again. So I want to start our lesson on World War One just to review. But before I do that, let me go back and clarify something that I was wrong about because I just went blank, and that happens. Y'all know me. This is nothing new, whether I'm home or whether I'm at school. It is a little bit harder for me here at home because this is not my element. You know how I am. I get in my element at school. I have my board, and I just roll with it. So this is a little bit harder, and I haven't taught school for 2 months now. So anyway, one of the things that I talked about with the last time that the only time that I've had this video was that the United States had two places in mind to build the canal. Obviously, we built it at Panama, but the other one was Nicaragua. Nicaragua and Panama were the two places in Latin America that the United States was considering building an isthmus canal, a faster cut through to the places in the West or the Pacific, or our trade routes, our places in China and Japan and the Philippines and Hawaii, Guam. All right. So I just needed to clarify that because I was wrong. First said Colombia, and it wasn't Colombia. Colombia owns Panama. It was Nicaragua. So, and I'm probably going to do that again. I'm sorry. I'll work on it. It's once again, I get to thinking about all the things I need to say, and I forget what I'm trying to say to you at the moment. But anyway, so if you've got your notes, let's go to chapter 8. If you've got your notes at home, if you still have your notebook. If not, maybe you have your packet. If not, just listen to me anyway. All right. So on your first packet, once again, if you're just now watching these videos, the first packet was just definitions to kind of keep you fresh on the material in the event that we went back to school. We then realized that we were not going to go back to school this school year. So then we had to do a second packet, and I made that packet a little bit different because I wanted you to be able to answer questions, open-ended questions to kind of keep you viewed. And then, of course, there's going to be a third packet that you can go by and get. And the third packet is a little bit different because it's multiple choice questions in sort of the same way that you would have seen the questions on the state test if you would have taken it May the 6th. Obviously, you didn't, but I tried to make it a little bit different just because we had the basic recall, and now this was supposed to be a little bit different setup for the packet. I'm going to refer back to packets. I'm going to refer to notes. Once again, I don't have my board here. Even if I did, I don't know that you could see it. Maybe you could. I'm at home. I'm not at school. So it's a little bit harder for me to do the thing that I normally do. But once again, I can review anywhere, whether I have a smart board, a board at all. So anyway, we left off talking about how the United States became imperialistic, a stronger country dominating a weaker country, which we refer to as a protectorate. Well, in 1912, we had a really interesting election between three men that were well known. One had been president, one was the sitting president, and one was an upcoming president, obviously, that will win in 1912. So you had Theodore Roosevelt, who became a Bull Moose Party, who created his own party, a third party, because the Republicans are going to pick William Howard Taft, who had been the president for the last 4 years. Now, if you remember, William Howard Taft had been the governor of the Philippines after we bought them from Spain in 1898 at the end of the Spanish-American War for $20 million. So with all that being said, you had Theodore Roosevelt, you had William Howard Taft, and then you had a new politician on the scene, a man by the name of Woodrow Wilson. Now, it's interesting because you've got a former president, a sitting president running against each other. And so what happens in 1912, if you remember from me talking in the progressive era, that once again, Miss E is going to go over with you and talk about the progressive era, because all three presidents, Roosevelt, Taft, and Wilson, are called progressive presidents. And so Woodrow Wilson wins in 1912 because Taft and Roosevelt split the vote. They were split. They didn't know who to vote for. It will happen again in 1992 with Bill Clinton and Ross Perot. We didn't get to that chapter, but I'm just telling you anyway, it was going to happen again. So 1912 rolls around, Woodrow Wilson becomes president. What does that got to do with World War I? Well, he is the president during World War I. Also known as, World War I had two nicknames other than World War I, because it wasn't called World War I because we had not had World War II. So the war was referred to as the Great War, or the war to end all wars, but it was most referred to as the Great War. And that had been on the state test in the past. Don't know if it was going to be on the state test this year. Either way, Woodrow Wilson wins and is the World War I president. Now, if you go back and look on your notes, and I'm going to pull my notes up on my phone. So if you see me looking at something, it is my phone. I'm trying to go back and stay in a form here with you, so that if you're looking at your notes, then I'm looking at what you're looking at, hopefully. So, and one of the things that is on your packet number 2 is list the events that led to World War I. So how did we get into the Great War? What happened? Well, the war starts in 1914, but we are not going to get involved at first. We're going to stay what is called neutral, which really bothers Germany because we really weren't neutral. And we've talked about that. We were neutral, but we were helping Britain. So if you're looking at your notes and if you answered your question on packet number 2, then the first question on hang with me, chapter 8 says list the causes of World War I. So the 5 causes of World War I are alliance system, nationalism, militarism, imperialism, assassination of Franz Ferdinand. Imperialism, which is what we just talked about earlier. Now, so to kind of keep this, just a review here, the 5 causes of World War I, the biggest cause of all of that would be the assassination of Franz Ferdinand, the future king of Austria-Hungary. Now, there was an empire in Europe at that time called Austria-Hungary. That is no longer the case now. We have Austria and we have Hungary today, because after World War I, they break up all empires in Europe. So Austria-Hungary's future king, Franz Ferdinand, is assassinated by a Bosnian revolution or Serbian nationalist called Gavrilo Princip. And that basically is the fuel for the fire there. And Germany is looking for war, specifically to, I guess, prove a point in Europe. And the United States finds out about this. And of course, we're going to kind of act like we're not going to get involved. But then Britain begins to use something called propaganda. And propaganda would be something that is used to kind of persuade us to get involved in the war. We're going to have money involved in Britain. And because of that, we can't afford for Britain to lose anything, because if they lose, we lose. And so Britain is going to try their best to use propaganda on the United States by making what are called propaganda posters. Now, obviously, I don't have my board here, but if I did, I would show you those propaganda posters, which are hanging from my ceiling at school. And if you've not been listening to me ever before and been staring off into space, you've been looking at some propaganda posters. But I also showed you lots of propaganda posters on my touch board, and they're one of my favorite things. Y'all know me, I say one of my favorites about every day. I love propaganda posters because they're just funny to me, and how they couldn't be used today. But a lot of them are ways that our government, their government's going to try to persuade Americans that we need to go to war. And Woodrow Wilson's going to claim neutrality, although we're going to start shipping goods to Britain because they're our allies. Well, you see, Germany had something that no other country had, and that's called underwater boats, U-boats, submarines. And you can't see them. They're below the water instead of on the water. So we start sending goods to Britain, and Germany starts blowing up her ships. The United States is going to get angry. Germany's going to sink the Lusitania. Sounds familiar, right? Spanish-American War. Remember the Maine. Remember the Lusitania. We're going to get mad at Germany. You can't sink our ships. We're going to make them sign a pledge called the Sussex Pledge. You can't sink any more ships. You sink any more ships, we're going to go to war with you. Well, Germany's going to also try to get Mexico to turn on us. And the Zimmerman telegram basically is Germany's way of trying to make a deal with Mexico, saying if Mexico attacks us and keeps us out of the war and we're distracted, then they will give them back Texas, New Mexico, and Arizona that was lost to Mexico in the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. And that never got to Mexico because it was intercepted by Britain, who was all too happy to share with the United States that Germany was trying to stab us in the back. So Woodrow Wilson in all this is going to use, and I'm reading from the book here, America First, meaning that we're more worried about America than we are Europe. And that we're going to actually try to stay isolated. So let's think about what isolated means. Isolated means to myself, which is what I've been basically for the last 2 months during this quarantine. You stay to yourself. You're now out in public and you're not out in business. We're going to stay here in America. We're going to take care of America. We're not going to worry about what's going on in Europe, but that's just too hard for the United States. Germany's not going to allow that, number one. Number two, we have money tied up in Britain and we need to keep our money. If they lose, we lose. It's all about the money here. And we've got, this whole, we've been trying to sell goods to other countries. We have industrial products that we're trying to send to other countries and sell. So we have money tied up in other countries and we don't need to lose that money. But Franz Ferdinand's assassination started this whole deal here. And Britain is going to get involved when Germany goes into Belgium, which was trying to remain neutral, and Belgium calls upon Great Britain. And then France and Germany are just not friends to begin with. So Woodrow Wilson is going to actually run for re-election in 1916, and he wins in 1916 with his campaign slogan, "I kept us out of war." So America is, thinking that, hey, maybe this is going to end before we can ever send the first troop. But it's not, because Germany's not going to keep its part of the Sussex Pledge, and they're going to blow up another ship. So we're going to declare war on Germany. And this war is going to be a little bit different in the fact that we're not going to be fighting. We're going to be fighting trench warfare. And that's one of the questions that's on packet number 2 is describe trench warfare. What is it? Well, both sides are going to dig these long ditches. You need to watch War Horse. You need to watch 1917. I think I've already told you this. But if you haven't, you've had plenty of time. You've got 2 more months off from school. So there's some movies that I think that you can benefit from and get a picture of what I'm saying here by watching War Horse or watching 1917. Another movie that is one of my all-time favorites that I actually showed my kids since we've been at home, isolated, quarantine, is Sergeant York, Alvin York. It's a good movie, Sergeant York. Now, it is in black and white. I think maybe you can watch it in color. But it's also a good movie that shows you the trenches and how the trench warfare, the two sides were fighting against each other, and the trenches were unsanitary, and you had all these men dying of diseases and rats, and it's really, you had no man's land in between the two trenches, and it just wasn't the ideal way to fight. And as a matter of fact, a stalemate is going to happen between Britain, France, and Germany. And the United States is not going to do that. We're not going to stay locked in a stalemate for 2 years like they did. So anyway, we're finally going to declare war on April 6, 1917, bringing us into the war. Now, we're not going to stay in the war long. The war's been going on for 3 years, and it's not going to last that long for us. But Woodrow Wilson is going to use something that we've not used before, and that is he's going to use conscription or forced military service, and he's going to use the draft because we don't have enough men in our military to fight the war in Europe. So we're going to use the draft, and at the time, males over the age of 21, because 21 was the voting age. I'm not used to talking. So 21-year-olds are going to be drafted and they're going to be sent to some sort of boot camp, and they're going to have to learn to, dig a trench, and they're going to have to learn to shoot, all those good things. But anyway, so when the men are going to be drafted, a lot of people had a hard time with this. They didn't believe that the draft was constitutional. But that means that men are going to be drafted and women are going to be left at home, and women are going to have to go to work, and women are going to go to work more than ever, and they're going to enter the workforce. And we as Americans at home were asked to do a lot of things too, like Hooverize. Herbert Hoover's going to be added to the cabinet there with Woodrow Wilson, and he's going to encourage us to eat certain foods on certain days. And that's supposed to make sure that we have adequate supplies for our soldiers. And, sort of like we're asked to stay home and do our part to end this coronavirus. But back then they were asked to just not eat certain foods. We're asked to stay home. They're asked to Hooverize. And speaking of that, the Spanish flu is going to break out in 1918, and there was no vaccine at the time, and no antibiotics. Antibiotics don't come along until 1940. So this Spanish flu, and we've talked about this, and it's really weird that we talked about this. And if you had Miss Flamenco, she made you read all these things that I had sent to her class for the Spanish flu, and it was a pandemic, which is what we're in right now. And so the Spanish flu killed a lot of people during that time period. And I think it's funny that I've seen a lot of things on social media about people wearing masks and how, you were not allowed to do this, you're not allowed to go certain places, and the word quarantine was used. All the things that we've been saying here were used during the Spanish flu. The fact is that the medicine has come a long way since then. But anyway, we're asked to Hooverize. Women are going to be working. And the war is going to last almost, it lasts to 1918. So November 11th, 1918 is when it ends. So we're in a war for about a year and a half there. And, to kind of summarize that, the war is, the modern technologies that we will see later on in World War II, they're just not there in World War I. But another thing that's going to happen is African Americans are going to leave the South to go find jobs that are now available in the North that would not have been available to them if the men had not been drafted to go to war. And it's called the Great Migration I, because it's going to happen again in World War II. And so what's going to happen is, which brings a whole nother lesson, is the Harlem Renaissance is going to be created because they're going to move to Harlem, New York, and there they're going to create their own culture, recreate their own culture. They're going to bring their ideas and their beliefs, and they're going to have their political voice there in the North. So the Great Migration won. So women are going to be working, African Americans are going to be given jobs. So things are different in the United States. Something else that is different, that is Russia, which originally started out being on the Allied side with Great Britain and France and the United States and Italy, who joins in 1915, are going to turn communist. All right, the Bolshevik Revolution is going to happen, and Vladimir Lenin is going to turn Russia communist. And so they drop out of the war, and that's a whole nother subject that I talked about a lot after that, communism, and how the whole Red Scare is going to happen after World War I. And that is something that we're going to have to deal with after World War I and even after World War II. You have the Red Scare Part II, which was that was one of the last things that I talked about before the Friday before spring break. So anyway, women are going to go to work, but then after the war ends, they're going to expect the right to vote. They had not been able to vote, and they wanted suffrage, and they felt like that their not an excuse, but their platform now is we worked during the war, we did our part. And so Woodrow Wilson is going to pass the 19th Amendment in 1920, allowing women the right to vote. And of course, we never finished the whole feminist movement. We never did any of that in the 1960s. And maybe one of the teachers at South is going to touch on that because I did not get to it. So the war is going to basically come to an end in 1918, and really the work begins. Once the war ends, then you have to figure out the peace afterward. Germany is going to be punished pretty severely. Woodrow Wilson's going to want a lot of things. Specifically, he's going to pass what are his called 14 points. And that is one of the questions. If you are doing your packet, if you go to page 4 and you look at number 16. So even if I had not made these videos, you would still be able to answer number 16 because you have, if you've kept your notebook, Woodrow Wilson's 14 points. And one of the main things of Woodrow Wilson's 14 points is he wanted peace. We didn't want to have to do this again, which he's going to die in 1924. He's going to have a stroke after World War I ends, and he's eventually going to die after, he's not going to die in office. But, he never gets accomplished what he really wanted to accomplish, and that was for us to join the League of Nations, which is part of his 14 points. But one of the things that the biggest theme of the 14 points was peace. But another thing that he wanted was freedom of the seas. If you look through your 14 points, you see there all the things that he had in mind. But specifically, and I just basically answered a question for you on your packet. So if you're paying attention and you have your packet, if you have your 14 points, then you should be able to answer this. But one of the things that he wanted us to do was to join the League of Nations, and Congress is not going to allow that to happen because we don't want to be involved in anything after World War I. We really do become isolated after World War I. It's like we can't get over the fact that this happened, and we don't want to be entangled in foreign affairs. And Woodrow Wilson's thinking, well, look, we don't want this to happen again, so if we join the League of Nations, then we will be able to kind of keep a watch on Europe. And Congress has said no. We don't want to do that. We don't want to get involved. We want to stay isolated, and we want to focus on the United States, which then we're going to go into the roaring 20s, which we know is consumerism and buy and spend. And then, of course, the Depression happens. And I'm going to talk on that too. So that's another couple of videos that I got to make there. But the Treaty of Versailles is going to end World War I. Congress never ratifies that. They don't agree with it. Specifically, Woodrow Wilson does not agree with the clause that is going to say that Germany has to take guilt, has to claim responsibility for the war happening. So, Germany's going to be punished pretty severely after World War I. There are going to be no more empires. 9 new countries are going to be created. But the big thing is Germany, and how they cannot pay all this debt, because what's going to happen is the League of Nations is going to be created, although it was Woodrow Wilson's idea as part of his 14 points. But Woodrow Wilson does not get his wish, despite the fact that he goes around and makes all these speeches and he's trying to get people on board. He doesn't get his wish, and he does not get to join the League of Nations, and it goes on without us. And we just, if you remember, I think I showed you this cartoon of the United States sitting on the wheel of a fire truck, and the fire truck needed to go put out Poland, which is going to be a country that is in trouble after World War I, and it can't go and put out the fire in Poland because we're sitting on the wheel that makes it go. So Germany has to pay all this debt to the Allies, then they're going to try and pay it to us. So it causes a depression for them. And we know where that goes. We know that leads to dictators and people that come along and promise things for Germany that, will get them out of the Depression, which leads to World War II. Once again, Woodrow Wilson's going to die in 1924. The 1920 election rolls around, and Warren G. Harding comes along promising a return to normalcy. And that's what people want to hear. Once the war's over, we thought that was the war to end all wars. We thought we were never going to have to do this again, that Europe was, no more empires, no more kings, no more that kind of government. And that's just not how it's going to be. As a matter of fact, the road is more difficult now than ever, because you do have some things going on in Europe. The United States is going to go through its own depression in the late 1920s and in the 30s. And then, of course, what happens is we turn back around and we're in World War II. So we didn't join the League of Nations. Woodrow Wilson has the stroke. Warren G. Harding becomes president in 1920 with a promise that really he can't deliver, because he himself is going to die of what they think is a heart attack, and Calvin Coolidge becomes president. Now, once again, during Woodrow Wilson's presidency, he was a little bit more hands-on government, not laissez-faire. But then you've got Harding and Coolidge are going to come along and they're going to lift that and have more laissez-faire. So, which leads to the 1920s and the whole buy, spend, overproduction, and eventually the Great Depression. And that is where I'll start the next time.